So welcome, Robin.
Thank you so much.
It's great to have this opportunity to have a chat about your score for Circo Electric, which had its premiere in the Sydney Opera House. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
How was it? How did it feel?
It was incredible, incredible. I've been reflecting on the fact that I've been a composer for 30 years, unfortunately, because I'm getting older, and I've never had the opportunity to write for an orchestra before. It felt like the culmination of a lot of time thinking about what that might be like. But also, having been a composer for 30 years without ever having done that, I've obviously developed a lot of skills in other areas, this kind of electroacoustic form. And so when Stephanie and I were approaching the work initially, I think there was this feeling that to go completely orchestral would be not quite where we'd been coming from. And so we thought, well, let's go half orchestral and half electroacoustic. How would I write for orchestra was my first problem. And then how would I incorporate that electroacoustic world, which is so much more familiar to me.
That sounds so exciting and so many layers. We'll dig into some of those. But you mentioned Steph, that's Stephanie Lake,
Stephanie
the choreographer, your long-time collaborator. And this is your first full-length production for the Australian Ballet.
Correct.
And you mentioned a lot of the electroacoustic and blending with the orchestra. That's quite a departure from some of the ballet scores that our audience might be used to. So what have they got to expect? What are the interesting things that they can look out for example?
I have certain philosophies about the way that I approach music generally and electronic music generally. I think that electronic music has a bit of a bad rap. It's often associated with, club culture, dance music, and it seems to be pigeonholed in very particular ways. My experience of electronic music is much broader than that, and really is an extension of the 20th century philosophy, if you like, all the way from the futurists until the late 20th century, that all sound is music, and the organization of sound over time is what we experience as music. One of the things that excites me about electronic music composition is this ability to bring the real world into the score, the ability to bring the very familiar alongside the very science fiction, of course, because electronic music has always been associated with sort of science fiction. The music of the future, the music of an unknown tomorrow. So to be able to bring things like bird song, the sounds of people in motion or in cafes, machinery, trains. There's a very famous early piece of electronic music by Pierre Schaeffer, which is literally just a recording of two trains, one coming from each direction and crossing in the middle. And you listen to that piece on headphones, and it's absolutely stunning. My philosophy of composition generally is always to create something beautiful. So I'm never trying to create something aggressive. There's a sense with contemporary music that there's almost an antagonism that's sort of crept from the mid 20th century onwards, particularly with total serialism and very academic music or very intellectual music, that music is somehow difficult or hard. And I think that audiences often, when they know they're going to hear something new, might brace themselves for something that they're not going to like. There's an assumption that you're being challenged.
So it's almost like when composers introduced trombones for the first time, or when you heard serialism, like the music of Schoenberg or Stravinsky for the first time.
Yes.
And now we just embrace it at everyday beauty.
Yeah.
You're trying to draw that beauty out of the everyday sound and bring it into the theatre.
Yeah, that's right. But also compositionally, what I like to do is work towards a position of elevation, not challenge. I think things can be challenging, but I don't like them to be aggressively so. I'm not trying to be dictatorial, ever. It's all about trying to communicate emotional states, physical states, which are the same thing.
And also giving respect to our audience as well, to go, this is a modernism that is beautiful and is relevant, because it's all the textures you're overlaying. And of course it needs to work with Steph's choreography.
Of course it does. And that I see that as my primary concern, is that I'm servicing Stephanie Lake's work. I am an employee of my partner in this moment. And so I have to service the work. And one of the most interesting things that I've discovered about writing music for dance, and I've done it now for over 20 years, is that it's often the case that a complete piece of music is not the answer. because the dance is one part of the polyphony. So when you're watching the finished result of a piece of music and a piece of dance, I often think that there has to be room for the dance in the music, which means often the music itself might seem unfinished or not quite complete. But in my experience, when I've delivered complete tracks to Stephanie to work with, there's too much going on. And I learned this lesson partly by delivering sketches to Steph, which I would say, this is a sketch. This is an unfinished piece of music. Nobody should ever be allowed to hear this. This is for rehearsal purposes only. She would then take that into the studio, develop choreographed material, and it would be complete. And I would see it, and I would think, I don't have to do anything else to that piece of music. So she completed it with the choreography. And I really think that that's something that I take into every collaboration now, is that a piece of music has to have space for the dance. It can't be too complete.
You touch on a little bit about the process that you've had with Stephanie Lake over the years, because you've been such long-time collaborators.
Yeah.
How's the process been different on this occasion, working for the Australian Ballet?
Well, it's been different in a lot of really interesting ways. One of them, as we've discussed before, was that the timelines were quite interesting. So I had to complete the orchestral music before Steph started developing work with the dancers. That was very unorthodox for us, because normally the music and the choreography come together simultaneously in the room. We're working together. So, a choreographic section will be developed musically as the choreography is being developed. So this is another reason that Stephanie wanted to do a 50-50 with the electroacoustic part of the work, because I think that for her, the idea of having a complete score to then choreograph to seemed like a stretch for her process. And so we decided to split it up that way. It had a lot of benefits and some detriment. So it had detriments in terms of the lack of flexibility, but the benefit of it was that those sections were kind of determined. And so from Steph's point of view, she could then work into the music rather than sort of collaboratively with it, if you like.
Yes. So, of course, we've spoken a little bit about the electroacoustic. What about the orchestral side of the score?
I mean, the orchestral, it was, as I said, it was such a thrill to be challenged with the creation of an orchestral score. Having studied orchestration at university 25 years ago, and harmony, voice leading, counterpoint. So no stranger to the complexity of orchestral music, but also very aware that people work their whole lives on orchestral music. Composers work really closely with orchestras and with the ideas of orchestration. And I have been working in a very different way, electroacoustically. So for me, I work a lot with mixing, tone balancing, all this kind of stuff, very similar to the ideas of orchestration. Still a lot of the similar ideas, but not the language and the rules, I guess. And so it was very necessary for me to work with it. My orchestrator, Eki Veldheim, because I realized I'm not going to become an expert in orchestration in 6 months. So I was able to put the music together in the way that I wanted it to be, but then delivering it to Erky was quite funny, and there were some funny moments.
Yes.
He looked at one of the trombone lines that I'd written in quite a repetitive, minimal section, and he just said, if the trombone player plays this as written, his lips will bleed. And I said, well, I don't want that to happen to anybody.
I thought you said I'll do it for all 3 trombones.
No, so there were lots of moments. I mean, I found myself sitting in the studio, it was quite comic actually, trying to write a tuba note and wondering how long I could sustain a tuba note. And sort of finding myself taking a deep breath and thinking, well, how long do I think I could play a tuba note? And so sort of, and making all these sort of guesses, like guessing. And I guess it's the physicality of that instrumental form, and especially on mass with so many different instruments. What an orchestrator does so brilliantly is they understand how the physicality of each of these instruments works, like from the piccolo all the way down to the tuba. They know what people's capacity are. They know that if you write in a certain register, you can't write for a certain duration. That's amazing to me. Yeah. And so to sit down with the orchestrator and actually be instructed in the ways of orchestration and how you can substitute instruments and share breathing in the winds and all this kind of stuff. That was a fascinating process.
Hearing and seeing your orchestral score and hearing the result of how it blended with the electroacoustic, it all seemed such a coherent and beautiful whole. Well, that was by design? Of course it was by design.
Well, it was by design. I mean, the piece should feel like a coherent whole. That is a design. But I think that there were some sections that I did approach quite electronically, I think, for the orchestra. There were other sections where I really wanted to lean into the orchestra. So I wrote one passage which to me is just a very beautiful chord progression written for orchestra, for strings mainly, and the French horns. And I just loved that because I thought that I have to do that because I have the opportunity to do that.
And I loved your mentioning of physicality earlier, even just your example of imitating what it's like to play that long tuba note. And then thinking about your orchestrating, I used the word orchestrating actually, you orchestrating the everyday sound into your electroacoustic score. It's almost like just making everybody aware of our physical senses, of our audio surroundings.
Absolutely.
But also putting the physicality of music almost front and center and marrying that with sound to an extent that you put two percussionists on stage.
Yes.
It was always one of the most exciting moments every night when I saw it.
That was a lot of fun. The work that Stephanie and I made previously to Circle Electric was called Manifesto. It was a big staging of 9 drum kits, and as a failed drummer, it was such a treat for me to actually work with 9 drum kits.
I don't think you failed that far, because you played in it, didn't
Well,
you?
I did play in it. I've gone back into training, and I'm playing better now than I ever did as a teenager. But that work was incredibly physical, and the physicality of all that percussion on stage. And I think we were bringing some of that energy into the idea of Circle Electric and thinking, well, here's this section that's a really driving, rhythmic, physical section. There's going to be 50 dancers on stage. This is like a big moment in the work. So let's bring the percussion up on stage and make them part of it. So the physicality of the dance and the physicality of the music. I mean, electronic music maybe less so, but orchestral music is a physical form. It's people are exercising down there in the pit. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of physical energy that goes into the creation of that beautiful sonic mass. And even that sonic mass is a form of energy. Listening is muscular, as Nietzsche would say. So it's all of that physicality is so important to the way that Stephanie and I work together, because we see dance and we see music as somatic forms. They are of the body, and so they belong together in a lot of ways, and music and dance together is such a beautiful phenomenon. So yeah, bringing those percussionists up on stage and seeing them there with the 50 dancers was a real treat for me.
I know the orchestras loved it. I know the percussionists loved it. They loved being part of the production. They loved being part of the physicality. And certainly, they tell me that when they're playing it, having all the dancers dance around them, dance Steph's choreography around them, actually inspired them to give more every night. It was incredible because they did 20 shows of it in Sydney. It was amazing. If you were to say to audience, I want you to take this feeling away from your score, Circle Electric, what would you say?
I would want 2 things actually, because I think there are 2 very distinct components to the score. The first thing is to listen with openness, because it's such a beautiful experience, and I think that the first section of the work is a really invitation to this. The second thing I'd want people to come away with, particularly given the way the work ends, is a lot of energy and a lot of positive energy. And I think one thing that Steph does really beautifully in her work is that, like I was saying about the way I approach music, she wants to elevate people. She wants people to feel just joy. The feeling of being uplifted is what Stephanie wants from people experiencing her works, and I share that desire for the music as well.
Robin, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Beautiful.